Okay, Stat Pack, if you're here, that means you stuck it out on this long road of statistics in sports, and now you're in the econometric equivalent of the Final Four. Last episode, we talked about team momentum, and today, we're talking about points in games and the best ways to get them. Well, I'm your everyman host, Brent Buckwright, and with me here are Drs. Steve Bronars and Dr. Nathan Woods. If you like the pod, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing our episodes as it helps us fight the dreaded algorithm. As we get into this, I think it's worth talking a little bit about why we're interested in the topic, because the theme has come up a few times over this series. One of the draws of statistics is that it gives a method of organizing events in the past and gives a way of thinking about the relative likelihood of something. And we often think about statistics in a predictive way, whether that's always appropriate or not, because we want to figure out what's likely to occur in the future and potentially change or guarantee those outcomes. And so one area where this comes up is in basketball, and whether players should go for more 2-point shots or 3-point shots, and what's going to maximize the points that a player or a team is going to get in total in a game. And Nathan, I'm kind of curious, can you lay out this debate a little bit, where the current thinking is at on the balance and, you know, how we actually should think about the proportion of 3 to 2-point shots?
Yeah, sure. I'll try and take a crack at that. Back in the olden days when Steve Bronars and I used to play basketball, first of all, it was like a crate with the bottom removed. That was the hoop.
Yeah.
And some people took their free throws underhanded, but there was no 3-pointers. It was a 2 points only. I think in something like 1979, 1980 was when the NBA brought in the 3-point line. And, at that point, you had the possibility of shooting from outside the arc, getting 3 points if you made it. And, I think that changed the game probably immediately, but more like over the last 15 to 20 years, I would say there's been more of a move to the 3-point shot and to such a degree that more recently, like in the last 2 to 3, 4 years, there's been some increasing concern on the part of, I don't know, mostly probably old fuddy-duddies, that there are too many 3-point shots and that maybe the game, the NBA should be thinking about ways to minimize the 3-point shot because
I would just speak for old fuddy-duddies. The 3-point shot, if you're successful 35% of the time, you're watching a game in which 65% of the time the players are missing the shot, which is not the most rewarding thing. And so, it would be even worse if they had a 4-point shot, because you'd go, oh, let's just keep it up. And as long as we can make it at least 25% of the time, we feel like we're doing okay. So there is an aesthetic reason, but I don't think we're going to be really talking about that in this episode.
Well, right, I think it's appropriate that on behalf of old fuddy-duddies, you interrupted and said, quit talking on my lawn.
I mean, that really does explain why Steve doesn't like soccer. They spend so much time not scoring.
But just to kind of get to the point, if you shoot a high enough percentage on 3-pointers, obviously the expected value can be higher than it would be for a 2-pointer, even if you made a higher percentage of the 2-pointers. 50% of 2-pointers worth the same as 33% of a 3-pointer. So you just need to do better in that relative sense on the 3-pointers, and then maybe you should be making more 3-point attempts as a result. And so I think what you've seen in basketball over that period of time, but I think especially in the last 5 years, 10 years or so, is a movement towards more 3-pointers. And that's where Steve, I think, is exactly right, that to some observers, that's a lot of missed shots. The best basketball players playing are missing a lot of their shots. So even if the expected value is higher, maybe it's no fun to watch.
So in thinking about what the right strategy is for a player or the right strategy, what the breakdown is for a team, how much are we able to actually account for some of the weirder factors that, if you're going for 2, you're more likely to get a foul, which is going to get you an extra 1-point shot. There might be some other confounding factors, like just having the possession of the ball more time is going to get you more points in general.
Well, I think you're kind of jumping ahead to maybe where we are currently. But so I think what's interesting is in the history of this thing, there was this movement away from the 2-pointers towards the 3-pointers. Now we're at a place where I think conventional wisdom for most people, even in the last couple of years, is that the 3-point shot, that relative percentage is higher. That it is worth more to take a 3-point shot than a 2-point shot. I think there's actually some research out there that sets that conventional wisdom kind of on its head, and maybe actually it turns out that the 2-pointer is back to where it maybe was a long time ago, where it's relatively more efficient. You're going to get more points off of a 2-pointer now than you would have from a 3-pointer, and some of that is because of the factors, Brent, that you just alluded to, the fouls and unsuccessful shots and rebounds and what happens next.
And also, it's the 2-point shots that you're not taking anymore that are inside the arc for the 3-point shot, but still 15 feet away. Those shots are going down, right, is what the studies show. And so
going
obviously
down as in you're not taking those shots, not going down like they
not through the hoop. Yeah. The incidence of those shots is lower per game than it used to be. But to me, the thing that's really fascinating about this, like you said, it was in the late 70s they changed the rule, and it started out with pretty low 3-point percentage. And even, by the year 2000, which was years after the rule change, it was still relatively low. And it's just been growing over time, even though I'm not sure there were any subsequent actual rule changes. Maybe changes in the way the games are refereed or something might play somewhat of a role. But why does it continue going up so that now I think it's like 42% of all shots taken in the NBA are 3-pointers. In some teams, it's like more than half. And that was not true even 20 years after the rule change. So a lot has happened. When it's interesting, like what is the cause of those changes? And I think that's part of the reason why people are thinking maybe it's gone too far, because you wouldn't have said that, I think, 20 years ago, because they were taking many fewer 3-point shots. I don't know if people are getting better at taking the 3-point shots than they used to be. They're training on it, but it's been a really long road to get to this point. It wasn't like overnight there was a drastic change in the shot selection.
Yeah, that kind of thing seems surprising to me, because I would think that with the number of games that are played every year, the amount of statistics that are reviewed in the sport, that you'd hit an equilibrium a lot faster, that we would know by now what the right percentage is.
It's funny you'd say that, because, and I know we talked recently about going for it on 4th down, and how, the research showed pretty compellingly that NFL coaches had not been going for it on 4th down nearly enough for a long time, when they probably should have. And I think it's interesting here too, that I guess on some level, Steve, it was interesting what you just said, that it took a little longer than maybe you would expect to take so many 3-pointers to begin with. And then here we are in, 2026 talking about how maybe actually we're taking too many 3-pointers. And maybe that's been the case, if you believe this research, for at least a couple of years. So yeah, Brent, I agree. That's with all the data, with all the kind of professional analytics and everything else, it seems like people are taking too long to come to the right conclusion.
So there was this article by Neil Payne that was kind of trying to review this. One of the tables that he showed that I thought was super interesting was showing over time, in 5-year increments, what the share of shots from different sections of the court were. And so you see that the 3-point shots go through the roof. The area that I thought was interesting, that there was a huge gap, was the 16 to 30 foot range. So just inside, the arc. Why do you guys think that area has just depressed so much? Is it that players realize there's not the extra point advantage from the 3-point line, but you still have a lot of the, the effort in shooting that far? Or is there any other ideas that you guys have about why that area would also stand out as not being as well as used?
I love the way you asked that question like you've been playing basketball your whole life, Brent.
Yeah, I apologize to everyone who's a fan of the sport. It's like when you're about to say someone's name and you can't remember if you're pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah.
So you really just lean in hard and hope that it's right.
So I had a high school basketball coach who,
it's called basketball, right?
he would get so frustrated if you took a shot from just inside the 3-point arc. And every time he got frustrated with me, I told him, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to make it either way. So whether I back up behind the arc or just in front of it, it's going to be the same outcome. But yeah, no, that's the point, Brent, is that if it's the hardest shot you're going to take that far out, but you don't get the premium of the extra point if you make it. So those by rights, you should never take those shots if you can back up a step, and those are going to be the lowest, make rates inside the arc.
The 3-point arc is not a half circle. It's more like an ellipse. And so it's actually a little bit closer to the basket along the baseline. So you're shooting and the backboard doesn't come into play at all. Those are the easiest 3-point shots to make. And then it's further from the basket if you're facing it head on. And but the variation in how far people are from the basket when they take a 3-point shot is probably a few feet. I think one of the recent things when you watch basketball now is that some players, Steph Curry and other really talented players, they start launching it from 4 feet, 5 feet behind the 3-point arc because they're so good at it and it's not going to get blocked and they're going to catch people off guard. But most of the shooters are like lined up right along that line. And so the 35% rate isn't always the same for a player, no matter where they are on the court, but it doesn't vary that much. Whereas like if you're right under the basket, it's much more than a 50% chance of making a 2-point shot, or you're going to get fouled, which is good too. And if you take it just from just inside the arc, like Nathan is describing, your chance is not that much higher than 35%. So those are the shots that, and why that didn't happen earlier, I don't know, but it's interesting, Brent, when you're talking about the Substack article, because it took time for people to not take those, what we would call mid-range jump shots. And why that didn't happen earlier, I don't know, but that's definitely the shots that are missing from the portfolio of shots that you see, the longer 2-point shots, because they really have a lower chance of going in than the close in 2-point shots.
And I think that's just to kind of finish that thought. I think the reason why the 2-pointer is now more efficient than a 3-pointer is, I think mostly, maybe not entirely, because we've got a couple of other factors that people are talking about too, but mostly because people are not taking those shots. So when they're taking the 2-pointers, they're closer in and they're achieving those higher percentages. So it's just better judgment about not taking those shots further out that are the hardest 2-pointers to make.
So we often talk about statistics and how if you look at one singular number, you can get misled because you're not getting a full picture of what's actually happening. Do you guys have any concerns that there do seem to be a few articles at least about this ratio, that they're focusing on the wrong things and about that by looking at the area where, you are getting points, that it's ignoring something that maybe we're not measuring as effectively?
Well, yeah, I think the conventional wisdom that people held, say, 10 years ago, ignored some of these complexities. And I think that's what the Substack, some folks over at Syracuse wrote some stuff on this too, coming to the same kind of conclusion. So partly it's the better shot selection is going to change those kind of relative efficiencies. But I think there's also more sophistication in terms of saying it's not just 50% times 2 compared to 33% times 3. It's actually what might be happening otherwise. So you might draw a foul, and this came up earlier, but if you draw a foul, that's probably the easiest way to get points because people generally shoot pretty well in the NBA if they're not being defended from the free throw line. So that's one big thing. And then the other thing is when you miss a 3-pointer, it's even more likely to be rebounded by the defensive team than if you missed a 2-pointer. And they are more likely to score on a subsequent possession And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you're shooting from so far away that the rebound is a longer rebound, which gives you some advantage in the transition going the other way. And so you can kind of think about this net, not just what's happening in my possession now, but what's happening for the other team on the next possession. And that's what some of these researchers are taking into account now.
Yeah, because for the 3-point shot, if 65% of the time it doesn't go in, then what happens, right? And if what happens after that is bad enough on average, that needs to be factored in. Because it's not like, well, the 65% of the time I miss, the other team gets the ball the same percentage of the time had I missed from under the basket, and they're going to not have a fast break any more likely. And all that other kind of stuff is like, I guess, shown to be a little bit unrealistic. And once you factor that in, these numbers are now so close in the expected value of the shot itself that it really tips the scales in the other direction. It says, yeah, what happens when you miss the shot, it needs to be factored in to the optimal strategy. And so I think it depends on how far you go from there. Because I think in basketball, it's going to affect the next 30 seconds of play or something, but it's not going to go beyond that. Whereas when we were talking about going for it on fourth down in football and momentum and all this other kind of stuff, it could change things for a while if you make or you miss it. And it's like that is all about what happens next, not just that play, but after that play, how likely are you going to score? How likely is the other team going to score? And so I thought it was very interesting that they're doing that in basketball too, because that's an important part of the whole analysis.
So before we move on, we've asked this in our other episodes, but are you a believer now that too many 3-point shots are being taken?
One, and this is a little bit like the going forward on fourth down and everything else, is that these are aggregate statistics that we're talking about, and that these studies are summarizing over lots of teams and years and everything else. If you've got Steph Curry on your team, I would say keep shooting 3-pointers. If you don't, and you don't have anybody else like him, you might want to not shoot a lot of 3-pointers. So there is going to be, individual players, individual teams, the strategies that they're taking one night versus another night in terms of the relative advantages or disadvantages, presented by the team they're playing, which is going to have a lot to do with what your strategy ought to be and whether you throw up a lot of 3-pointers. But if you've got great 3-pointers, I'd say keep shooting them. I would say definitely don't shoot those harder to make 2-pointers. But it's going to depend a lot on the composition of your team.
Yeah, I think that when you see these big guys who used to play with their back to the basket and down low, closer to the basket, and they're out there shooting 3-pointers, it just is probably the biggest change. Because when there were half as many 3-point shots, the guards, the smaller players, the Steph Curry type players, they were shooting them. But you didn't have guys that were like 7 feet tall, 6'9", 6'10", shooting from that distance, because you thought, well, they'll have a real advantage if they get down low. They're going to, you lob it into them there, and they have worked on their offensive game close to the basket with their back to the basket, and they're going to, be successful a high enough fraction of the time. And I think even back in the day, those guys, a lot of times they couldn't shoot free throw. They were like bad at shooting from a distance. Like you said, like right. You could be pretty good at making a free throw. You go like, wow, I'm better at making a free throw than like Shaq or Wilt Chamberlain or the like historically great players. And so I think it's just like what they were working on, right? Because had maybe those really talented players that developed the sky hook and other moves down low been working on shooting from like 28 feet away, they probably get pretty good at it. They just didn't do that, so that just looks odd. I don't know if I don't like it. But that's just more of a taste thing. I don't think it's as entertaining, because I'd rather see more variety of ways of scoring than everybody trying to do the same thing, even though you're like, that's not your comparative advantage, really. What are you doing? But they must know what they're doing, because they're trying to win.
Before we wrap up, are there any other games where this consideration might matter?
Well, I think that when I was looking around at other changes and how it affected strategy. I was looking at baseball and a rule change relatively recently that encouraged more stolen bases. And the way you prevent a stolen base is that the pitcher, stolen base is like when the guy is at bat and then someone is on base and they advance without anybody hitting the ball or anything.
Thank
And
you.
in between the time the pitcher throws the ball to the catcher, and the catcher can throw it to second base or whatever, the guy advances. And um, that had been a strategy that was going down slowly over time because the nerds, the sabermetrics baseball stats people are going, that's not a good move. You're not successful often enough, and then you take a runner off the bases and you have one more out, and what are you doing? Um, but the way the pitcher would police that would be by throwing the ball to the first baseman and trying to pick the guy off. If he was leaning too much towards second base, the most common stolen base would be going from first to second. And so he'd throw over there. And I don't know, Nathan, what the rationale was, but I guess people want baseball to move faster. So they'd get bored if the pitcher throws too often to first base. So he can't do that. He can only do it like twice. And I looked at the data, and almost immediately there's been this jump. Now it's been in place for 3 years. And if you look at the couple years before the rule change and the 3 years after, there's 43% more attempted stolen bases than there were prior to that. And it didn't take 20 years. It didn't take how are we going to react to this? So to me, the interesting thing is like, wow, that's pretty instantaneous. It's been pretty level. It's been in place for 3 years. It's been about the same number of attempts. This is a big, big sample size because you got 30 teams and 162 games. And the success rate is a little bit higher, but I thought it's not that much higher. The success rate from immediately prior to the rule change was about 75, 76% successful. And it's like 79%. So like a 3.5% jump in success rate. There were like 49% more successful stolen bases than in the earlier period, mostly because you're trying it more and a little bit more successful. But I don't know if that surprised you that the success rate didn't change that much, but it's a huge response to a relatively modest change in success. But I think the most interesting thing to me, Nathan, is it happened like overnight. Whereas when they introduced the 3-point line, it took them years to go like, hey, this is the best strategy. Let's do this. So what do you think of that?
Well, I think a couple things. First, as a San Francisco Giants fan, I didn't notice any difference. So again, I think
I'm picking up on context, but are the Giants bad?
In alternate years, they're bad.
Yeah,
like every other year they're good. Every other year they're bad. That used to be the case.
I appreciate that, Steve, but that's about a 15-year-old commentary. But yeah, no, what they aren't is fast or athletic. And each year we are told that that's going to change, and it hasn't. But so yeah, first comment, that's fascinating because I know at least a couple of teams like the Giants haven't really responded to that particular rule change.
I didn't look at it team by team. That's interesting. Yeah.
Which means that some other team is doing it even more. And so that might be like the team with the Steph Currys and with 3-pointers. But that's number one. Number two, I'm fascinated by this. I wonder if it's just that the kind of the relative sophistication of data analytics in 2025 or the last couple of years compared to 1980, 1985, 1990 makes all the difference. Because if you had all those guys with their computers doing all this stuff, maybe the 3-pointers would have climbed a lot faster.
That's exactly what I am thinking, because I would still take some time because you build your roster differently. Speed is now more important. Slightly, although speed still getting around the bases after the ball is in play is important. But certainly with the 3-point shooting, you will fill your roster differently as you realize how valuable the 3-point shot is. But that would be my takeaway, and that's why I brought it up. I think it's a very different sport, different time period. But I think analytics is so upfront now that it's not going to ever take a decade or more to react to a change in the rules, because everybody's got some modeling going on that says, hey, if we do this, we'll have an advantage. And will respond if they have the personnel to do so.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you may not even need a rule change. I know, and we'll have to talk about this more in some other episode, but you see, if you're watching any soccer, the people commenting will say, should we, on the kickoff, kick the ball all the way down the field? Should we retain possession? And there's kind of shifts over time in how you want to approach that. And I think in the olden days, it would have been a wise old coach told his players to do what they did based on what that person thought. Nowadays, you'd have the people in the analytics saying, we've got this little marginal advantage that we can get at some point in the game. Same thing on a free kick. Should I go for goal? Should I cross it? And all of those decisions now are going to be informed by, teams of analysts in the background in a way that they weren't 20, 30 years ago.
In football, professional football, I find it annoying. Again, this is like the old guy perspective. They have said, we don't want ties. We don't like ties. Like, why not? It ended in a tie. If you don't like a tie, you do things before you get to the end of the game to make that less likely. But it goes into overtime. And the old rules, until I don't know how long ago, but pretty recently, were you flip a coin, which I love, for who gets to choose. And they go, do you want the ball first, or do you want to kick the ball to the other team? And everybody back in the old rules would say, kick the ball to me. But the really old rules were, it just ends in a tie. But for the last 30 years or something.
Ever since they had face masks.
Yeah. And they went away from the leather helmet. But anyway, so for years, relatively recently, it was like, we want the ball first, because if we score a touchdown, game over.
Which never made any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, but that was a rule. They just didn't want, they wanted an overtime, but not a long overtime. And so, yeah.
Why not just flip the coin?
Exactly. So it was like a no-brainer. You want the ball, because if you can score a touchdown, game over, the other team doesn't even touch the ball, you go home, you win. You score a field goal, the other team has a chance to either score a field goal and then it keeps going, or score a touchdown and they win. But now the rule is, no matter what you score, the other team gets a shot at it. And the question is, do I want the ball, or do I want to let them go first and know what I need to do to win? And I think you should want to get the ball second, but there's some contingency on this, because let's say the first team gets the ball and does nothing, and the second team does the ball and gets nothing, or they each get field goals or whatever. It's only a 10-minute period, and then at that point it would become a tie. And the chances, what are my chances of getting the ball the third time, or on the third change of possession, my second time of getting it, and the clock could run out. And so I'm sure they're running all sorts of simulations and all this, because common sense would tell you we should let them go first. That way we know how to respond. But if after those first shot that each side has, there's no guarantee you're going to have equal number of attempts. At that point, it's what they call sudden death. Whoever scores anything at that point wins. So I don't know. I don't think there are enough observations to know what teams are choosing to do, but I'm sure they all have some contingencies on what they should do. And I don't know, Nathan, what do you think would make the most sense in that? Is it more important to go second and know you got, or more important to increase your chance if it ends in a tie after the first time each team has the ball, to be maybe the only one to have the ball again?
I say go for broke, take the ball, and always go for it on fourth down.
And the other thing is, do you go for like the 2-point conversion? Because that's another thing you see that teams usually don't do after they score a touchdown. But it really you're much more likely to either win or lose if you do that. The ties are less likely. So I think you're right that the analytics is probably way up the list of things that people are thinking about when they're, coming up with a game plan and stuff like that, compared to earlier.
I'll say this, Nathan. You can get 2 points or 3 points in basketball and 3 points or 6 points in football, but it's only by talking to Steve that you can get 15 points and no point. That's been our sports analytics series. Thank you guys for listening. Well, that's been this episode of Significance. This episode's been brought to you by Edgeworth Economics, a leader in economic consulting, and with the help of our producers, Kimberly Krewald, Ryan Deal, and Brian McLamara of Brand Ready Media, with music by Armwell Lang. Thanks for listening, StatPack, and always remember to check your assumptions.